Hey everyone, today we're diving into one of the interesting topics in Japanese history, the Onin War. This wasn't just any war, it was a decade-long civil war that shook Japan from 1467 to 1477, during the Muromachi period. Imagine a feud that starts with a disagreement between two powerful figures and then explodes into a nationwide conflict. That's exactly what happened here. The Onin War began as a clash between Hosokawa Katsumoto, a high-ranking official, and Yamana Suzin, a regional lord. Their dispute spiraled out of control, pulling in the Ashikaga shogunate and various daimyo, or feudal lords, from all over Japan. This war marked the start of the Sengoku period, also known as the Warring States period, where daimyo across Japan fought fiercely to gain supremacy. Now, let's talk about how this all started. In 1464, Shogun Ashikaga Yoshimasa faced a big problem. He had no heir. So, he convinced his younger brother, Ashikaga Yoshimi, to leave his life as a monk and become his successor. But then, in 1465, Yoshimasa's wife, Hinotomiko, gave birth to a son named Yoshihisa, throwing a wrench into the plans. This unexpected birth led to a major succession crisis. On one side, you had Yoshimasa and his brother Yoshimi, backed by Hosokawa Katsumoto. On the other side, you had Hinotomiko, who wanted to rule as regent until her son Yoshihisa came of age. She had the powerful Yamana Suzin and other samurai clans in her corner. But it wasn't just about who would become the next shogun. The Ashikaga shogunate's real power lay with a council of powerful daimyo, and their ranks were thinning due to deaths and internal conflicts. There were also other succession disputes, like those within the Hatakeyama and Shiba clans, adding more fuel to the fire. By 1467, all these tensions erupted into the Onin War. The conflict saw the Eastern Army, led by Hosokawa Katsumoto, facing off against the Western Army, led by Yamana Suzin. Initially, the Eastern Army supported Yoshimi, while the Western Army backed Yoshihisa. But in a dramatic twist, Yoshimi, who hated the war, fled and sought refuge. This caused the Eastern Army to switch its support to Yoshihisa, and the Western Army ended up supporting Yoshimi. And Hosokawa's Eastern Army, about 85,000 strong, and Yamana's Western Army, with around 80,000 soldiers, were almost evenly matched as they converged near Kyoto. The fighting kicked off in March when the Hosokawa mansion was set on fire. By May 1467, a Yamana mansion was attacked, and the conflict quickly escalated. In July, Shogun Yoshimasa appointed Hosokawa as the commanding general, aiming to suppress the rebel Yamana. This led to heavy fighting throughout the month, with hundreds of large buildings destroyed. Hosokawa found himself cornered in the northeast part of Kyoto around his mansion, while Yamana controlled the south and west. In September, Yamana received 20,000 reinforcements from Auchi Masahiro. Despite this, Hosokawa managed to bring the emperor and the abdicated emperor to the Bakufu before Yamana could seize the emperor's palace with 50,000 men. Hosokawa then received additional reinforcements from the Akamatsu clan. On November 1st, Yamana captured the Shokoku-ji temple by bribing a monk. The chronicles of the time paint a grim picture of the ongoing carnage. The fighting dragged on with no decisive action. On New Year's Day, Hosokawa attempted an attack, and tried again in April, but the two armies mostly glared at each other across a deep, wide trench. Many monasteries were burned, including the Tenryuji. In 1469, Yoshimi switched sides to support Yamana, forcing the shogun to name his son Yoshihisa as his heir. This bizarre twist turned the war into a conflict between brothers, with Emperor Go-Tsushimikado stripping Yoshimi of his court ranks and declaring him a rebel. Both Yamana Suzin and Hosokawa Katsumoto died in 1473, but the war persisted with no end in sight. The Yamana clan started losing heart as the label of rebel began to take its toll. In December 1477, Auchi Masahiro, one of Yamana's generals, burned down his section of Kyoto and withdrew. By the end of the decade, Kyoto was in ruins, a place for mobs to loot what little was left. Neither the Yamana nor the Hosokawa clans had achieved their goals, only managing to deplete each other's forces. During this turmoil, Shogun Yoshimasa was noticeably absent from the efforts to resolve the conflict. Instead, he indulged in poetry readings, cultural activities, and planning the Silver Pavilion, Ginkaku-ji, to rival the Golden Pavilion, Kinkaku-ji, built by his grandfather. His complacency essentially sanctioned private wars and skirmishes among other daimyo, spreading violence throughout Japan. Even though the battles in Kyoto eventually ceased, the war had spread across the country. In Yamashiro province, the Hatakeyama clan's internal conflict led to a stalemate. By 1485, the peasants and lesser samurai, fed up with the ongoing violence, revolted. They formed the Yamashiro Iki, forcing the clan armies to leave and setting up a provisional government. Other Iki, or peasant uprisings, emerged across Japan. In Kaga province, a sect of Jodo Shinshu Buddhists called the Iko Iki revolted after being enlisted by a local warlord. By 1488, they overthrew him and took control of the province, establishing their headquarters along the Yodo River. These uprisings were part of a larger social upheaval, often referred to as Gekokuho, where the lowly oppressed the high-ranking. The frequent uprisings of the 15th century were expressions of widespread discontent, with peasants playing a significant role in the chaos. After the Onin War, the Ashikaga Bakufu, or shogunate, completely collapsed. In reality, the Hosokawa family took control, with the Ashikaga shoguns reduced to mere puppets. When Yoshimi's son, Yoshitane, became shogun in 1490, the Hosokawa Kanrei, or deputy, soon forced him into exile in 1493, replacing him with another Ashikaga, Yoshizumi. By 1499, Yoshitane sought refuge in Yamaguchi, where the powerful Auchi family backed him militarily. The political scene grew even more chaotic when Hosokawa Masamoto, the Kanrei, was assassinated in 1507. The following year, Yoshizumi fled Kyoto, and the Auchi reinstated Yoshitane as shogun. This set off a series of bizarre conflicts over who would control the puppet government of the shogunate. After Masamoto's death, his adopted sons, Takakuni and Sumamoto, battled for succession, though Sumamoto was himself a puppet of one of his vassals. This type of power struggle, characterized more by the quest for control over puppet governments than by high ideals or territorial greed, defined the wars that followed the Onin War. The Hosokawa family maintained control over the shogunate until 1558, when they were betrayed by the Miyoshi, a vassal family. Similarly, the powerful Auchi were overthrown by their vassal, Mori Motonari, in 1551. By the end of the Warring States period, only a handful of warlord families remained. The most significant outcome of the Onin War was the relentless civil war that spread beyond the capital. For example, the Hosokawa attempted to incite civil strife in the Auchi domains, which ultimately forced the Auchi to submit and retreat. From the close of the Onin War, this kind of internal conflict, whether it involved vassals trying to overthrow their daimyo or succession disputes drawing in external daimyo, became widespread across Japan. There's some debate among scholars about whether the term Warring States period, a term borrowed from Chinese history, is appropriate for this era in Japan. Some argue that since the emperor and shogunate remained nominally in command of the country, it wasn't truly a Warring States period, but rather a warring warlords period. Others, like Mark Ravina, Mary Elizabeth Berry, and Conrad Totman, contend that the provinces functioned like quasi-independent states, making the term fitting. The cost of this century-long conflict was enormous for the individual daimyo. The constant warfare weakened the majority of Japanese warlords, paving the way for the three great unifiers of Japan. Starting with Oda Nobunaga, These figures found it easier to establish a single, unified military government due to the diminished power of the warlords.